The mountain stood tall above the town, wrapped with pine trees that touched the sky. At the very top sat a mansion, wide and elegant, with tall windows that reflected the sun. The mansion belonged to Governor Michael Jordan, a man loved and respected by many people across the state. Michael had built the mansion years ago, not only as a home but also as a place of peace. Politics had brought him long days, endless meetings, and pressure that would have broken weaker men. Yet whenever he came back to that mountain, he felt quiet in his heart. His wife Michelle loved the gardens, and his children enjoyed the wide open halls where laughter echoed. The mansion was not only a house of stone, it was a place filled with memories. Birthday candles had been blown out there. Christmas lights had glowed against snowy windows. Family dinners had been shared under the great wooden beams of the dining room ceiling. But where there is beauty, sometimes envy grows. The small town below the mountain had a homeowners association, known by most as the HOA. They were supposed to care for shared lands, maintain roads, and make sure every home in the neighborhood looked well. But over the years, their work had turned from simple rules into heavy control. They fined people for small things: a mailbox a few inches too tall, a garden fence painted the wrong shade, or even grass that was 1 week late to be cut. Michael had always paid little attention to their warnings. He believed his position as governor gave him some space. After all, he had worked his whole life to serve the people. He never thought the HOA would try to challenge him directly. But quiet papers began to arrive at the mansion. At first it was a small letter, tucked in an envelope. It read, "Notice of violation, decorative lighting not removed by season end." Michael laughed and placed it aside. The string lights were still hanging on the porch, and he thought, why does it matter? Another letter came. Notice of violation, driveway surface not in compliance with HOA standards. Again, he set it aside. His driveway was paved with smooth stone, brought from another state. It was beautiful, far more solid than the gravel paths below. Then more letters came, one after another. Grass longer than allowed. Paint color slightly off the approved chart. Windows too reflective under afternoon sun. Each one demanded a fine. $50 here, $200 there, $500 for the driveway. Michael thought it was nonsense. He even joked with Michelle about it. "Maybe they want us to paint the whole house gray and cover the windows with curtains," he said with a smile. But Michelle looked worried. She knew how strict the HOA board could be. "Michael," she whispered one evening while they stood on the balcony, looking out over the valley, "they don't like us. They think you're too proud, too high above everyone else." Michael shook his head. "They can't touch us. This house is ours. I am the governor of this state. We've followed the law." What he didn't know was that the HOA board had grown angry. They held long meetings, whispering about him. The president of the board, Donald Trump, a man with a strong voice and sharper pride, decided Michael was an example they had to make. Everyone else pays. Everyone else obeys. He thinks he's special. He thinks the rules are not for him, Donald said at one of their closed meetings. Around the table sat other members, including Oprah Winfrey and Bill Gates, who nodded with quiet agreement. By the end of the meeting, a plan was formed. They would not let this governor escape their power. Weeks later, Michael came back from his office in the capital city to find a heavy envelope waiting for him at the gate. He opened it, his brow furrowing as he read. "Final notice, your unpaid fines have reached $120,000. If not settled, property rights will be enforced under HOA covenant law." Michelle gasped when she saw the paper. 120,000. That's madness. They cannot do this. Michael placed the letter on the table. His hands trembled slightly, but he hid it. It's just paper. They won't act. They're only trying to scare us. But deep down, a small seed of worry began to grow in him. The days turned colder as autumn wrapped the mountain. The leaves turned red and gold, falling on the wide roof of the mansion. And then one morning, a sound echoed up the winding road. Heavy trucks. Engines rumbling. Michael stepped outside in his coat and looked down the slope. A line of machines crawled up the path, bulldozers, trucks, and vans marked with the HOA emblem. What are they doing? Michelle whispered, clutching his arm. They wouldn't dare, Michael said, though his voice was not steady anymore. The machines came closer. Workers in hard hats stepped out, carrying clipboards. At the front of the group was Donald Trump himself, walking with a confident stride. He held a document high in his hand. Governor Jordan, Donald called out as he reached the top, this property is in violation of HOA covenants. Unpaid fines demand action. We are here to enforce the rules. Michael's heart pounded. He stepped forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the stone path. This is my home. You have no right. I serve this state. I have given my life to the people here. And you come with bulldozers? For fines that are not even real. Donald smirked. The law is the law. Even governors must obey. The workers began to move. They placed signs on the gates. They measured walls and marked them with bright spray paint. Michelle cried out, begging them to stop. The children stood at the windows, confused and afraid. Michael felt heat in his chest, a mix of anger and helplessness. He had always fought battles in government buildings, with speeches and votes. But here, at his very doorstep, the battle was different. For the first time in years, the governor of the state felt powerless. And yet, deep inside, another feeling rose. Not fear, not despair, something stronger. A quiet fire. If they wanted war over his home, they would soon learn who they were challenging. The mountain mansion stood tall that evening, but storm clouds gathered above it. The HOA thought they had won the first round. They did not know the storm that was about to fall on them. The cold morning air carried a strange stillness across the mountain. Inside the mansion, the family woke up uneasy. Michelle moved quietly through the kitchen, her hands shaking as she poured coffee. The children stayed close to the windows, whispering to each other, asking if the trucks would come back. Governor Michael Jordan tried to stay calm. He dressed in his usual suit, his tie carefully knotted, as if he was preparing for another day at the state office. But his face was pale, his eyes heavy from a night without rest. He knew the HOA had not finished. The envelope on his desk told him enough. The words "Final Enforcement Notice" stared at him like cold eyes. By mid-morning, the rumble returned. Engines growled as trucks climbed the narrow road again. Dust rose behind them, and the sound echoed like thunder. This time there were more of them, bulldozers, cement breakers, and large dumpsters following close. Michelle rushed to the balcony, her heart racing. Michael, they're back. There are more machines than yesterday. Michael stepped outside, his jaw tight. Stay inside. Keep the children close. The convoy stopped at the gates. Donald Trump walked in front again, carrying papers. Behind him were Oprah Winfrey, Bill Gates, and other HOA board members, their faces cold and firm. Workers followed, waiting for the signal. Donald raised his voice. Governor Jordan, your time is over. The unpaid fines are more than 120,000. You refused to follow the rules. Today, this property will be cleared. Michael's hands clenched. His voice rose like thunder. This is my home. You cannot tear it down. I am the elected governor of this state, chosen by the people. You think your little board has more power than the people's voice? Donald smirked. This is not politics. This is property law. Even a governor must obey the rules. The workers moved forward. Bright orange paint splashed across the stone walls, marking them with large X's. Hammers banged against wooden frames. The heavy bulldozers shifted their steel blades, waiting for command. Michelle ran outside, tears streaming down her face. Please. This house is our life. Our children grew up here. You can't just destroy it because of grass or paint or a driveway. But Oprah shook her head. Rules are rules. If we bend them for you, then no one else will respect them. The children pressed their faces against the window, watching in fear as strangers marked the house they had always called safe. Michael felt fire rise in his chest. He stepped closer, his voice steady though his heart pounded. If you touch this house, you will regret it. Not because I am governor, but because what you are doing is wrong. You are not protecting a neighborhood, you are destroying lives. Donald turned to the workers and waved his hand. The first bulldozer roared forward. Its blade slammed against the garden wall, breaking stone into pieces. Dust flew through the air. The sound echoed like a scream across the mountain. Michelle cried out. The children sobbed from inside. Michael stood frozen, his fists tight at his sides. Every strike felt like a blow to his chest. Memories flashed before his eyes: his daughter's first birthday on the lawn, his son learning to ride a bike along the driveway, quiet nights by the fireplace with Michelle when the world outside was too heavy. The workers moved faster. One by one, they smashed the walls, ripped away the windows, and tore the roof apart. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and stone fell into piles of dust. The mansion that once shined like a crown on the mountain was being reduced to rubble. Neighbors gathered on the lower road, watching the scene from a distance. Some whispered in disbelief. Others nodded, thinking the HOA was right to treat everyone the same. But no one dared climb up to stand with the governor. Michael's chest ached. His voice cracked as he shouted over the machines, "This house stood for more than walls. It was my family's heart. And you are tearing it apart for power, not for rules." Donald only shrugged. You should have paid your fines. Hours passed, and the house fell piece by piece. By evening, the tall windows were gone, the dining hall was crushed, and the gardens were buried under broken stone. Only dust and twisted steel remained where laughter once lived. The workers packed their machines and left, leaving silence behind. The HOA board walked away without a word, their footsteps crunching on the broken path. Michelle knelt in the dirt, picking up a piece of wood, tears dripping onto it. The children clung to her, crying softly. Michael stood tall, his eyes fixed on the ruins. Inside him was a storm: anger, grief, and a new fire he had never felt before. He was not only a father who lost his home. He was the governor of the state, and the people had trusted him to defend them. Now he understood their pain more deeply than ever. How many families had felt powerless against boards, rules, or systems that crushed them? How many had cried out while others shrugged? He turned to Michelle, his voice low but firm. They think this is the end. They think they've humiliated me. But they have awakened something. This is not just about our home. This is about everyone who has been bullied, silenced, and broken. I will not stop until justice is restored." Michelle looked at him through her tears, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "Michael, what will you do?" Michael stepped forward, his shoes sinking into the dust of his once beautiful home. His face was hard, but his eyes glowed with quiet strength. "I will show them that the people are stronger than their board. They think they demolished stone, but they built a storm. And that storm is me." The mountain was quiet again, but inside Michael, the battle had only just begun. The ruins of the mountain mansion stayed silent for days. The wind blew through broken stones, carrying dust into the valley. Where once stood tall windows and bright gardens, now only piles of rubble remained. Governor Michael Jordan returned to the site each morning. He stood there in his coat, looking over the wreckage, his heart heavy but his mind sharper than ever. Michelle watched him from the car, holding the children close. She knew his silence was not weakness, it was the beginning of something larger. For years, Michael had spoken in the state capitol about fairness, about giving people a voice. But now, those speeches felt different. He was no longer a leader speaking about other people's struggles. He was a man who had tasted the same pain. One afternoon, Michael called a press conference in front of the ruins. Dozens of reporters climbed the mountain road, carrying cameras and microphones. Neighbors stood at the edge, curious to hear what he would say. Michael stood tall on a broken stone, his coat brushing against the dust. Behind him, the remains of the mansion framed the scene. His voice carried clear across the mountain air. They came with bulldozers. They came with rules written on paper. They said I owed fines for grass, paint, and windows. But this house was more than walls, it was the heart of my family. And they tore it down to show power, not justice. Reporters leaned in. Cameras clicked. The story spread across television screens that evening, showing the ruins, the broken garden, and the governor's steady eyes. Michael lifted his hand as he continued, his tone rising. This is not only my story. Every family who has faced unfair boards, unfair rules, unfair hands pressing down on them, your story is mine. They thought I was one man. But I stand here as every man, every woman, every child who has felt powerless. And I promise you, this fight has only begun. Cheers rose from the crowd. Reporters shouted questions, asking if he would press charges, if he would use his office against the HOA. Michael only said, "Justice will come." That night, Michelle sat beside him in their temporary rented house in town. She touched his hand gently. "Michael, you've already started a storm. People are calling, sending letters, sharing their own stories. They see their struggle in yours." Michael nodded, his eyes still staring ahead. "Good. Let them come. Let their voices be heard. I don't want revenge for myself, I want change for all of them." Within a week, letters flooded his office. Families from across the state wrote to him. Some told of HOAs that fined them for planting the wrong flowers. Others said they were charged hundreds for a fence an inch too tall. One family wrote how their shed was torn down because it was painted the wrong color. Michael read every letter. With each story, his anger sharpened into resolve. He invited some of the families to the Capitol. They gathered in a large hall, faces full of hope and fear. Michael stood before them, listening, taking notes, shaking hands. Among them was a retired teacher, Maya Angelou, who spoke with trembling words. "Governor, they made me pay thousands for keeping a small bench in my yard. It was where I sat to rest after working in my garden. They said it was against aesthetic rules. I had no choice but to pay, or they threatened to take my home. A young father named Elvis Presley added, "They fined me $500 because my car had a small dent in the door. They said it lowered property values. I barely have money to feed my kids, but I had to pay." The hall grew heavy with silence. Michael's eyes swept across the crowd. He saw tears, tired faces, and quiet suffering. Finally, he spoke. "You are not alone anymore. I will not let this continue. We will build new laws. We will hold them accountable. Together, we will rise." Applause filled the hall, but Michael's face stayed firm. He knew the fight would be long and hard. The HOA boards were powerful, rich, and connected. But he also knew he carried the voices of thousands now, not just his own. Meanwhile, at the HOA office, Donald Trump sat with his board. Oprah Winfrey and Bill Gates sat across the table, reading the news on their tablets. Donald slammed his fist down. "He's turning this into a circus. He's making us the villains. If he wins, HOAs across the country will lose power." Oprah spoke calmly. "He's not just angry about his house. He's giving people hope. And hope is dangerous to people like us." Bill frowned. "We underestimated him. We thought tearing down his mansion would break him. But it gave him strength." Donald's eyes narrowed. "Then we will not sit quietly. If he wants war, we will fight it. He may be governor, but we have money, lawyers, and influence. We'll remind him that rules are rules." Back in his office, Michael gathered his closest allies. He called in legal experts, lawmakers, and community leaders. They worked late into the night, drafting bills that would protect homeowners from unfair practices. Michelle brought him coffee, watching as he bent over papers. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Michael, don't forget to rest. You're carrying so much." He looked up at her, his eyes softer. "I will rest when this is done. For now, the fight needs all of me." The next week, Michael introduced the Homeowner Protection Act to the State Assembly. The bill aimed to stop excessive fines, limit HOA power, and give families the right to appeal unfair decisions. The room buzzed as lawmakers read the proposal. Some supported him, some doubted. But the public stood behind him. Thousands signed petitions. Families rallied outside the Capitol, holding signs that read "Homes are hearts, not rules," and "Justice for families." Michael stepped onto the balcony of the Capitol building, looking down at the sea of people. His voice carried strong, "They took my home, but they gave me a mission. Together, we will build something stronger than stone. We will build fairness. We will build freedom." The crowd roared, their cheers echoing across the city streets. For the first time since his mansion had fallen, Michael felt a deep fire of hope. The HOA had destroyed his house, but in doing so, they had awakened a movement. And this storm would not be stopped. The Capitol building stood tall with white pillars shining under the morning sun. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Governor Michael Jordan's Homeowner Protection Act was about to be debated. Every seat in the large hall was filled. Lawmakers sat ready, journalists pointed cameras, and ordinary citizens crowded the balcony to watch history unfold. Michael walked in slowly, dressed in a dark suit. His eyes were calm, but inside his chest, his heart pounded. He knew this day was not just about words. It was about families waiting outside, holding signs, hoping someone would finally fight for them. Michelle was in the gallery with the children, their small hands holding banners painted with bright letters, "Homes are hearts." She gave him a quiet smile, one that told him she believed in him no matter what. The Speaker of the Assembly struck the gavel. The chamber will now hear arguments for the Homeowner Protection Act. Michael rose from his seat. His voice filled the hall, steady and clear. "This is not about me. This is about every family who has suffered in silence. It is about retired teachers fined for benches, young parents threatened over fences, neighbors punished for flowers planted in their yards. It is about fairness. Our homes are not prisons of rules, they are sanctuaries of love and memory. And it is time we protect them." Applause broke out from the balcony. The Speaker banged the gavel again, calling for order. But across the room, opponents of the bill whispered and shook their heads. Lobbyists for powerful HOA groups sat in the back row, dressed in sharp suits, watching with cold eyes. Among them was Donald Trump, sitting tall with a confident smirk. Oprah Winfrey and Bill Gates sat beside him, their presence reminding everyone that the HOA board still had influence and money. One lawmaker stood up. "Governor Jordan, rules exist for a reason. Without HOAs, neighborhoods would fall apart. Lawns would grow wild, houses would lose value, and communities would suffer. Are you saying families should ignore rules entirely?" Michael answered firmly. "I am saying rules should serve people, not punish them. Rules should protect communities, not destroy homes. What happened to my family was not protection, it was abuse of power. And it must end." The debate stretched for hours. Supporters rose, telling stories of families crushed by unfair fines. Opponents argued about property values and order. The room felt like a storm of voices, colliding again and again. Outside, the crowd grew larger. Families filled the Capitol steps, holding signs, chanting Michael's name. News cameras rolled as people shared their personal battles with HOA boards. The story spread across the nation. Meanwhile, inside the boardroom of the HOA headquarters, Donald Trump paced like a restless lion. "We cannot let this pass. If it does, every HOA across the country will lose power. We'll be finished." Oprah leaned forward. "Michael has the people. They see him as one of them now. The more we push, the stronger he gets." Bill Gates adjusted his glasses. "Then we push harder. We'll use lawyers, lobbyists, money, everything. We'll remind lawmakers that without us, neighborhoods lose order. Fear will be our weapon." Donald's eyes narrowed. "Then it's war. If Jordan wants to fight in the halls, we'll fight in the courts. We'll bury him in papers, lawsuits, and delays until his bill dies." The next day, a stack of legal challenges landed on Michael's desk. The HOA's lawyers had filed multiple cases, claiming his bill violated property rights. At the same time, powerful lobbyists flooded the assembly, whispering in lawmakers' ears, offering donations and deals if they voted against it. Michael sat at his desk late into the night, reading through the papers. His face was tired, but his spirit did not bend. Michelle entered with a tray of food. She placed it down gently and touched his shoulder. "Michael," she said softly, "they want to drown you in paper and politics. But you're not alone. Look outside." He walked to the window. Down below, on the street, hundreds of people held candles in the dark. Their lights flickered like stars, their voices rising in a steady chant, "Homes are hearts. Homes are hearts." Tears touched his eyes. He whispered, "They gave me strength when I had none. Now I must give them victory." The next session in the assembly was even more intense. HOA lawyers filled the front row, ready with arguments. But Michael was not alone. Families came forward to testify. Maya Angelou, the retired teacher, stood before the chamber. Her voice shook but stayed strong. "I gave my life to teaching children. And yet, I was fined for sitting on a bench in my own yard. I had no power to fight back. But today, I have a voice. And I want fairness." Elvis Presley, the young father, spoke next. "They told me my car made my street look poor. I worked 2 jobs to feed my kids. I could not fight them. But today, I know I'm not alone." Their words echoed in the hall. Lawmakers who once doubted began to listen. The faces of the people, their tears, their courage, those were stronger than lobbyists' whispers. Donald Trump sat stiff in his chair, his jaw tight. For the first time, he saw the board's power slipping. As the vote drew near, tension filled the room. Michael rose one last time. His words were simple, but they cut deep. "You can vote against me. You can stand with money, with influence, with fear. Or you can stand with the people. Remember this: houses are made of walls, but homes are made of hearts. Which side do you serve?" The chamber grew silent. The speaker called the vote. One by one, lawmakers pressed their buttons. Green lights and red lights lit up the board. The numbers shifted slowly, every second heavy like a hammer. Michael held his breath. Michelle clasped her hands together, whispering prayers. The people in the balcony leaned forward, eyes wide with hope. Finally, the speaker read the result. The Homeowner Protection Act passes by a single vote. The hall erupted in cheers. People cried, clapped, hugged each other. The balcony shook with joy. Michelle held the children tight, tears of relief streaming down her face. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. He had fought battles before, but this victory was unlike any other. It was not just a law, it was justice for families who had suffered too long. But as the cheers filled the hall, Donald Trump leaned toward Oprah and Bill Gates, his voice low. "This is not the end. If he thinks one vote makes him safe, he's wrong. We still have the courts. We still have power." Michael walked out of the chamber to meet the people waiting outside. Thousands greeted him with cheers, waving candles, banners, and signs. For a moment, standing in the sea of hope, he felt the mansion's loss turn into something far greater. The HOA had torn down his home. But now, he stood on the edge of tearing down their empire. The storm was far from over. The victory in the assembly shook the state, but the battle was not over. The HOA board had lost in the halls of government, yet they were not ready to surrender. Within days, Michael Jordan was served with thick stacks of legal papers. The board claimed the Homeowner Protection Act was unconstitutional, that it robbed them of authority, and that it violated contracts signed by homeowners. Donald Trump led the charge, his voice booming in every interview. "This governor thinks he can break the law just because he lost his house. He is wrong. We will win in court, and we will remind everyone that rules cannot be ignored." Oprah Winfrey stood beside him, calm but firm. "If his law stands, every HOA in America will collapse. Order will vanish. Neighborhoods will fall apart. This fight is bigger than one governor, it is about the future of communities." Bill Gates quietly worked behind the scenes, pouring resources into the case, hiring the best lawyers, and preparing for a long war. Michael knew what was coming, but he did not fear it. He called his team together in the governor's office. Papers covered the table, maps of neighborhoods spread across the walls, and files full of family stories lay in piles. Michelle stood by his side, her eyes full of quiet strength. "We have faced bulldozers, lobbyists, and lawmakers," Michael said, his voice steady. "Now we face the courts. But remember this: we do not fight with money or influence. We fight with truth, and truth is stronger than any weapon." The courtroom was packed on the first day. Journalists filled the benches, families crowded the back rows, and cameras waited outside. At the front sat the three judges, their faces calm but watchful. Michael sat with his lawyers, dressed in a simple suit. Michelle and the children sat behind him, their presence a reminder of what this fight meant. Across the aisle, Donald Trump sat with his team, smiling with confidence. Oprah and Bill flanked him, their lawyers stacked with files and binders. The case began with the HOA lawyers. They spoke with smooth words, quoting contracts, citing rules, and painting a picture of chaos if Michael's law stood. They described neighborhoods falling apart, property values collapsing, and communities ruined. "Our rules are not cruelty," one lawyer argued. "They are protection. Without them, beauty will die, and order will be lost." When it was Michael's turn, he stood slowly. His voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried across the room. "Order without heart is not order, it is control. Protection without fairness is not protection, it is punishment. My family's home was not torn down to save the neighborhood. It was torn down to show power. And that is wrong." He did not wave papers or shout arguments. Instead, he called witnesses. Maya Angelou took the stand first. Her words trembled but were steady. "They fined me for a bench in my yard. I am 70 years old. That bench was where I sat when my knees hurt after gardening. They told me it ruined the beauty of the street. I paid with tears, not just money." Next was Elvis Presley, the young father. "They fined me for a dent in my car. I work all day, come home tired, and try to raise my kids. That dent did not harm anyone. But they made me pay more than I had." One by one, families stood and spoke. A mother fined for her child's toys left outside. A veteran punished for a flagpole an inch too tall. A widow threatened for planting roses not on the approved list. The courtroom grew heavy with their voices. Even the judges leaned forward, listening closely. Donald Trump frowned, whispering to his lawyers. Oprah's calm face showed cracks of worry. Bill adjusted his glasses again and again, unable to look at the families directly. Finally, Michael gave his closing words. He stood before the judges, his eyes steady. "Your Honors, this is not only about me. This is about every voice in this room. Homes are not just walls, they are the hearts of families. And when power forgets heart, it becomes cruelty. I ask you not to see me as a governor, but as a father who lost his home, and as a voice for thousands who have been silenced. Give us back our dignity. Give us back fairness." The courtroom fell silent. The judges retreated to chambers. Minutes felt like hours. Families held each other's hands. Michelle whispered prayers, her eyes never leaving Michael. At last, the judges returned. The chief judge rose, holding the decision in his hand. His voice echoed in the quiet room. "This court has reviewed the arguments, the evidence, and the testimonies. We find that the actions of the HOA board in demolishing Governor Jordan's home were excessive, unjust, and unlawful. We further find that the Homeowner Protection Act stands as a fair and necessary law to defend families from abuse. Therefore, judgment is ruled in favor of Governor Michael Jordan and the people." The room erupted. Families cheered, tears streaming down their faces. Journalists rushed out to broadcast the news. Michelle hugged the children, sobbing with relief. Michael stood still for a moment, his eyes closed, letting the weight of the words sink in. Then he turned, his arms opening wide as his family ran to him. He held them close, his heart finally breathing peace. Donald Trump's face burned with anger. Oprah shook her head in silence. Bill looked down, defeated. The board had lost not just in court, but in the hearts of the people. Outside the courthouse, thousands waited. When Michael stepped out, the crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing across the city streets. Candles lit the night again, banners waved high, and chants of "Homes are hearts" filled the air. Michael raised his hand, his voice carrying above the noise. "Today is not my victory. It is yours. They took my home, but together, we built something stronger. We built justice. We built hope. And no board, no bulldozer, no fine will ever take that away again." The crowd roared. Families hugged each other, strangers became friends, and the night glowed with unity. Weeks later, Michael and Michelle returned to the mountain. The ruins were still there, but now flowers grew among the stones. Neighbors had planted them as a sign of respect. Michael stood on the spot where his home once stood, the wind brushing against his face. Michelle slipped her hand into his. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Michael shook his head. "They took walls, but they gave us a movement. And movements cannot be torn down." He looked at the horizon, the sun setting in colors of gold and red. For the first time since the mansion fell, peace filled his heart. The mountain no longer held a house. It held something greater: justice, memory, and hope. And in that hope, the Jordan family found their new home.